Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name is Susie Ironside, and I'm the Visitor Studies Curator, thank you, at Glasgow Museums. This morning, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how Glasgow Museums works to provide pathways to active cultural participation, and specifically how we work in collaboration with funders and citizens to create a sense of collective ownership and civic pride in the heritage of Glasgow and its cultural assets through applied use of visitor studies. In this paper, I'm going to really present a practice-based approach, focusing primarily on the current refurbishment and redisplay project of one of the major museums in the city, the Burrell Collection, which Mark mentioned earlier. And the Burrell is housed in a purpose-built Category A building with protected status based on its architectural significance. And drawing on my own skills and experience as a practitioner of visitor studies, I'm going to analyse and explore the methods of participation that we're using to create a sense of collective ownership of this wonderful museum, a key asset to the city's cultural infrastructure. So, firstly, to frame my paper, and I will talk about this, so you can read or listen, it's up to you. I'm going to provide some additional context for the work that we're undertaking in terms of the refurbishment and redisplay of the Burrell. And it's here that I'm going to give a brief overview of the current financial climate within the UK, whereby the majority of heritage projects, like the Burrell Collection redisplay, are supported by external funders who place great emphasis on the value of shared heritage and its collective ownership, particularly with communities living locally to heritage sites. I'm then going to move on briefly to introduce you to a national change initiative that Glasgow Museums participated in, which was called Our Museum, Communities and Museums as Active Partners. And here I'm going to discuss how the strength of the relationships which we're building with our communities, primarily as part of our work on the Burrell Collection, are helping to not only help communities play a role in creating a sense of shared cultural heritage, but also ensure that as a cultural organisation, we're continuing to sustain a strong participatory process at our core. Finally, I'm going to detail the key methods that we're using to work with the public to explore the value of heritage and create collective ownership of the Burrell Collection during its refurbishment and redisplay. Focusing on a practice-based approach, I'm going to talk in detail about some of the key methods aimed at creating a sense of shared ownership that are currently underpinning our work on this project. But before I begin, and this may cover some of what Mark spoke about, but it's nice to remind you anyway, I think it's important to give you a little bit of information about Glasgow Museums. So we were visited by over 3.9 million people last year in 2015, and we encompass 9 museum venues spread across Glasgow, and they're all free to enter. And this also includes the Burrell Collection, which is obviously the key focus of my paper today. We also have a presence in a brand new facility called COAVN Hall, which is a shared cultural and leisure space for the city. And we also have our own dedicated outreach service, which is the Open Museum, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as a museum service, and I think that this is really important, at the heart of Glasgow Museums is a fundamental philosophical commitment to the museum as a civic space, where awareness is raised and a clear invitation is given out to visitors and participants to contribute to and shape the discussion. And as Mark said, the city itself is internationally renowned for its cultural offer, and we attract tourists and local people alike. And when you look at this from a local perspective, figures from the Glasgow Indicators project showed that 86% of Glaswegians took part in some form of cultural activity in the past year. And within that, museum visits accounted for 41% of that cultural activity. So the notion of creating a sense of collective ownership of shared heritage in the city and its cultural infrastructure is really at the core of what we do in Glasgow Museums. Our museums are rich cultural resources to be accessed and enjoyed by citizens. And as an organisation, we do embrace the notion of the right to the city and its heritage and the collective power to influence change. And I think it's important as well to take it out with the city. At a national level, we are also guided by the Scottish Government's Community Empowerment Scotland Bill, and that was introduced last year in 2015. And this aims to empower community bodies through the ownership of land and buildings and by strengthening their voices in the decisions that matter to them. So the Burrell Collection is a major cultural asset for the city, the nation, and is also of international significance. And Mark mentioned a little bit about the types of collections that we have within the museum earlier. So there's a wide range. We've got Chinese ceramics, Islamic pile carpets, medieval stained glass, tapestries, sculptures, quite an eclectic mix. The construction of the museum in the late 70s, obviously opened in 1983, was very innovative for its time, and it employed what were considered really pretty cutting-edge technologies, and this is reflected in the building being held up as one of the finest examples of Scottish architecture from the 20th century. However, it's not just the roof of the building that's leaking, the actual fabric of the building is somewhat deteriorating. And just before we closed at the end of October this year, only about 20% of the collection was actually on display to the public, so we had to make a fundamental change. So, in Scotland and the rest of the UK, as I said, many large-scale heritage initiatives receive significant funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund. And this is quite important because the Heritage Lottery Fund advocate that heritage provides the roots of our identities and enriches the quality of our lives, and it inspires pride in communities, and that's why we believe heritage should be protected for the future and why everyone should have the chance to explore and look after it. So as it stands at the moment, alongside money from the UK Government and the Glasgow City Council, the refurbishment and redisplay of the Barrel collection has received £15 million worth of pledge from the Heritage Lottery Fund. And as part of our funding requirements, we really have to demonstrate these three things here, so I'll just summarise these quite briefly. We've got to transform the fabric of the museum and create a sustainable cultural resource for the city and its people. We've got to give a broad range of people, both current and future visitors, the chance to become involved in the decision-making processes for the refurbishment and redevelopment of the museum. And we've got to re-energise and revitalise a cultural heritage site for the benefit of the local community. So, these are quite grand aims that we've got to achieve, and they're not really without their challenges. I did mention that Glasgow has an international reputation for its cultural offer, and indeed it does. We have high levels of cultural participation. Yep, we do. But this is really only part of the story. Large parts of the city, as again Mark mentioned this morning, they're not accessing the cultural offer for lots of reasons, including disability, ill health, and/or poverty. Much less are they participating in the development and finding kind of a notion of collective ownership in terms of cultural assets. Within the context of the Barrel collection, the museum is located in the south side of the city, and the area that it's located in is one of the most ethnically diverse in the city. It has higher than average youth unemployment and high numbers of vulnerable people living in very close proximity to the museum. And from audience research, we realised that the people coming to the Barrel, they weren't representing the local people. So we really are faced with something of a challenge in terms of involving the people from the local area in the building's redevelopment. So as I mentioned at the start, Glasgow Museums recently participated in a national change initiative entitled Our Museum, Communities and Museums as Active Partners. This kind of summarises the main ethos of Our Museum, but I'll just briefly touch on it. It really responded to research by a practitioner called Dr. Bernadette Lynch, who said that despite presenting numerous examples of groundbreaking innovative practice, the funding invested in public engagement and participation has not successfully succeeded in shifting the work from the margins to the core of many of these organisations. And at Glasgow, we were chosen to take part because we do have a strong, or we like to think we have a strong participatory core at our work, and we hoped to expand that. And largely that was through our open museum, who for the past 25 years have been building relationships, creating opportunities, and engaging in collaboration and community-engaged work. So learning from the participatory techniques used by colleagues in the open museum and skills developed across a range of staff from participating in our museum, the project team in the Barrel is working to ensure that we harness these existing skills and continue to build internal capacity to ensure that we have a staff team that has the confidence and the ability to act and collaborate in new ways and consequentially build relationships with local people that will create new ways of working and develop learning and growth. And not least, give people the chance to participate meaningfully in the development of something that actually belongs to them. So, going back to what I said previously about the Barrel Collection's location in terms of its socioeconomics, we are actively relationship building with local people in terms of planning for the project to ensure we create a greater sense of collective ownership, particularly amongst local people, and ensure that we create a rich cultural resource for all. So I'm just going to talk now about some of the techniques that we've used. With all of what I've said before in mind, our aim is to involve the local community in the refurbishment and redevelopment of the Barrel. And it's been founded on an approach that kind of looks at two different strands. The first is cultivating new relationships with organisations working near to the museum, many of whom represent people who are not currently accessing the museum, and that's things like housing associations, libraries, schools, etc. Secondly, we're also looking at an approach that builds on relationships we have with current audiences through existing work that we do across Glasgow museums, of which there is a lot. So, some of the key methods that we've used, with varying degrees of success, to be honest, for us, it's really important that we maintain visibility within the local community during the closure period of the museum. It's going to be 4 years that we won't have a burial collection, so we have to be visible. We have to stay in people's minds as much as we can. And we're trying to identify local groups and organisations in the area to build on these existing relationships that Glasgow Museums and the wider Glasgow Life family are part of. Our work is really at the moment centred on gathering feedback from a range of audiences defined by the team as priority groups, and this includes, but is not limited to, families, specifically those of children under 5, and adults. But we're mindful that we're trying to actively engage people, so learning from the Open Museum's methodology, we opted to take our teams outside the walls of the museum. The museum is a barrier for people, and we need to accept that. So we took our staff and some of our handling objects into local spaces within the community, like schools, places of worship, and community centres. And it was here that we were able to create a safe space and encourage conversation and participation, as well as raise awareness of the museum and its offer for local people. And this was really because quite a lot of the local people, as I said, they're not coming to the burial collection, so we can't assume that they actually know what it is, or indeed that they're interested in what it is. And that's why it was really important to take it outside of the museum. One of the other methods we're using is through the Glasgow Museum's advisory panels, and these were actually founded as part of the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery Museum redisplay back in 2005, and they've continued to grow over the past 10 or so years. Within the context of the burial collection, we're going to work with staff and other members of the project team. We'll work with them to advise on a range of audience-specific needs and requirements. But again, we're trying to work with them more actively. It's not just about consultation, it's trying to kind of move up that ladder of participation and work with them in a more collaborative way. And we also hope as well that members of the panel who represent schools, local people, a whole range of different folk, will actually act as kind of ambassadors. They'll champion the redisplay of the burial collection amongst local people. And again, we hope that that will create a sense of shared ownership. The burial collection itself actually sits within a huge country park in Glasgow, which is called Pullock Country Park. And it's really important that we get these people on board as well, because what we've found is people come to the park but don't come to the museum. So why is that? They're in the park, the museum is there, why are they not crossing that threshold? So we've created 2 major opportunities for park users to participate. Again, trying to raise awareness of the museum being in the park and its unique kind of cultural offer. So we work with local groups who use the park, such as running clubs, and we have buggy fit, so people exercise with their kids in the park to kind of work with them, to raise awareness of the museum and its refurbishment, and offer people the opportunity to participate. And as someone presenting earlier said, you can offer the opportunity, it doesn't necessarily mean that people want to get involved, and that's something that we just have to accept as well, but try and work to kind of overcome that. We then followed this sort of small-scale outreach with a programme of face-to-face interviews with park users, again offering a kind of link to the museum and trying to understand what facilities and amenities we could actually offer local people. We also, don't forget our young people. The burial collection attracts one of the oldest audience groups in Glasgow museums, so it's really important that we try and get the future people of the city involved, and that's young people. We ran a takeover day and we got 2 local schools in. And the kids were sort of between 14 and 16. Many of them hadn't visited the burial or actually even heard of it before, so it was quite an interesting experience for them. Again, this was about raising awareness of the museum amongst this group of people, but also giving them the opportunity to kind of talk to staff, meet staff, and try and influence some of the design and development of what is a local museum for them. But it's really important also that we engage with current visitors. We know people don't come, but we also know lots of people do come, and we can't forget them in this process. So as part of a kind of ongoing process of research and consultation, we're doing a lot of face-to-face interviews. We have a space in Kelvin Grove Museum and Art Gallery that we will use to engage visitors in a dialogue to help inform the redevelopment of the museum as well. And it's hoped again that this will create a sense of shared ownership of this cultural heritage resource. So I'm just going to sum up, because I think I've gone slightly over. These are some of the examples that Glasgow museums are using, specifically concerning the refurbishment and redisplay of the borough. And it's really an opportunity for us to exchange dialogue and create opportunities for participation with members of our communities, with the long-term goal of creating a shared ownership of the city's cultural and heritage assets. The aforementioned methods are providing us with opportunities for the museum and communities to be curious and become actively involved. And we're seeking out opportunities to build on and deepen relationships, and also internally reassess the ways that we exchange knowledge, skills and ideas and offer our communities pathways to participation. Just to end, I'm going to leave you with a reflection from Nina Simon, who is the author of The Participatory Museum. And she asks, how can cultural institutions reconnect with the public and demonstrate their value and relevance in contemporary life? I believe they can do this by inviting people to actively engage as cultural participants, not passive consumers. And I think it's this notion that not only underpins our work at Glasgow Museums, but that ultimately creates collective ownership and active participation in the development of cultural heritage. Thank you.